Chapter 1, Block 1. Edward leaned against the old stone wall, the evening sun casting a warm glow across his face. He could feel his heart beating faster every time he saw Carmelita approach through the quiet courtyard, her habit flowing gracefully behind her. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, a spark of unspoken words passing between them, and then she quickly lowered her gaze, cheeks flushed. The air seemed to thrum with a tension neither could name, a delicious yet dangerous kind of anticipation. Edward's hands itched to reach out, to brush a stray lock of hair from her face, but he restrained himself, knowing how forbidden even the smallest gesture could be. Every stolen glance was a thrill, a secret world they shared just for themselves. "Do you want me to continue with Block 2? Or would you like any adjustments to tone, detail, or style for this first block? Você diz, continue. Oh, ChatGPT, diz, great. Here's Chapter 1. Block 2. Edward and Carmelita met in the quiet corners of the convent garden, where the roses grew thick and fragrant, hiding them from prying eyes. Each meeting began with nervous smiles and whispered greetings, their voices trembling just enough to make every word feel precious. Edward often brought little notes, folded neatly, filled with thoughts he couldn't say aloud, and Carmelita would clutch them to her chest, feeling a warmth bloom inside her. She wrestled with guilt, her heart torn between devotion and desire, knowing that every glance, every word, was a small rebellion against the vows she had taken, and yet, the forbidden sweetness of their connection made her pulse race, made her laugh softly when Edward's eyes sparkled with that gentle mischief she adored. In those brief moments, the rest of the world disappeared, leaving just the two of them suspended in a fragile bubble of secrecy. Shall I move on to Block 3 of Chapter 1, or would you like any tweaks to this block first? Você diz, continue. Oh, ChatGPT diz, perfect. Here's Chapter 1, Block 3. But the tranquility of their secret world was fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind. Lately, Edward had noticed Father Matthias watching more closely, his eyes lingering a little too long during Mass, his questions tinged with curiosity. Carmelita felt a chill whenever she sensed his gaze, a quiet fear knotting her stomach, warning her that their hidden meetings might not stay hidden for long. Still, when Edward's hand brushed hers in a fleeting, forbidden touch, the fear melted, replaced by a surge of courage and longing she hadn't expected. Each letter exchanged, each glance shared, felt like a lifeline, binding them together against a world that would never understand their hearts. And yet, beneath their joy, the shadow of suspicion loomed, hinting that the next step might force them to confront dangers neither was ready to face. Do you like this chapter as it is? Or do you want any adjustments, more detail, emotion, or sensory description before we move to Chapter 2? Você diz, continue. Oh, ChatGPT diz, great. Let's move on to Chapter 2. Suspicion arises. Here's Chapter 2. Block 1. Father Matthias had always been a quiet man, but lately there was an edge to his gaze, a sharpness that made Edward shift uncomfortably whenever their eyes met. Carmelita sensed it too, the way he lingered near the garden path, pretending to prune flowers while really observing, always watching. Questions that once felt innocent now carried a subtle weight, a probing curiosity that made their stolen moments feel exposed. Edward and Carmelita exchanged nervous smiles, each one masking the anxiety gnawing at their hearts. Even the convent walls seemed to whisper warnings, the quiet halls echoing with the possibility that their secret could unravel at any moment. The thrill of their love was now tinged with tension, each encounter carrying the faint taste of danger. Shall I continue with Block 2 of Chapter 2? Or would you like any adjustments to this first block? Você diz, continue. Oh, ChatGPT diz, here's Chapter 2, Block 2. Father Matthias didn't confront them directly, at least not yet, but his words began to carry double meanings, subtle nudges that hinted he knew more than he let on. He asked Edward about errands with a tone that suggested suspicion, and Carmelita felt his gaze linger on her longer than any prayer should allow. Every whispered conversation, every casual remark now felt like a test, and both of them found themselves overthinking the simplest gestures. Carmelita's heart raced when she saw him near the chapel, imagining the worst even as she tried to steady her breathing. Edward tried to offer comfort, squeezing her hand just enough to remind her that they were in this together, yet the fear lingered, stubborn and unyielding. Each moment was a delicate dance, balancing desire, guilt, and the creeping weight of Father Matthias's silent scrutiny. Shall I move on to Block 3 of Chapter 2? Or do you want any tweaks before we continue? Você diz, Continue. O ChatGPT Dis. Here's Chapter 2, Block 3. One evening, as twilight painted the convent walls in muted gold, Father Matthias lingered near the garden, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. Almost knowing, Carmelita felt a shiver run down her spine, a silent warning that their secret was teetering on the edge of exposure. Edward's hand found hers, a small anchor in the storm, and they exchanged a look full of unspoken resolve. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The subtle pressure in the air, the way the priest's presence seemed to stretch every second, made the world feel unbearably tense, yet intimate all at once. Every laugh, every whispered confession, now carried a shadow, a weight that neither could ignore. And as the night deepened, so did the realization that Father Matthias's subtle threats might soon become impossible to ignore. Do you want to keep this as is, or make adjustments to enhance suspense, emotion, or sensory detail before moving to Chapter 3? The threat? Você diz. Continue. O ChatGPT DC. Perfect. Let's move on to Chapter 3, The Threat. Here's Chapter 3, Block 1. The first time Father Matthias hinted at real consequences, Edward felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, one that no amount of reassuring smiles could loosen. He had thought suspicion was the worst they'd face, but now it carried a sharp edge. Money, favors, obedience, his words laced with a quiet menace that made Carmelita's pulse race. She sat in the convent chapel later that night, hands clasped in prayer, wrestling with guilt and fear, wondering how their love had led them into such a perilous trap. Edward paced in the shadows outside, restless, torn between anger at the priest and the desperate desire to protect Carmelita at all costs. Their secret, once a delicate refuge, now felt like a cage with invisible bars, tightening around their hearts. Each stolen glance carried not just longing, but the silent dread of what Father Matthias might demand next. Shall I continue with Block 2 of Chapter 3? Or would you like any tweaks before we move on? Você diz. Continue. O ChatGPT diz. Here's Chapter 3, Block 2. Carmelita couldn't escape the storm inside her, the relentless pull between her devotion and the love that refused to fade. Every time she looked at Edward, she saw the same fear mirrored in his eyes, a reflection of her own desperation. Father Matthias's threats had a way of twisting their emotions, making them doubt themselves, their choices, and even their right to feel joy. The convent, once a sanctuary, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows, each corridor echoing with the priest's quiet menace. Edward tried to comfort her, his voice steady, warm, a tether to sanity in the chaos, but even he could see the toll it was taking. Carmelita's heart ached with every whispered demand, the weight of obligation pressing down on her like a suffocating shroud. Shall I continue with Block 3 of Chapter 3, or would you like any adjustments before we move on? Você diz. Continue. O ChatGPT diz. Here's Chapter 3, Block 3. The tension reached a point where silence became unbearable, each unspoken thought amplified in the quiet of the convent halls. Carmelita knew she couldn't let Father Matthias control their lives forever, yet the thought of defying him filled her with a mixture of fear and resolve. Edward's hand on hers was a lifeline, grounding her in the reality of their love, reminding her that they were stronger together than apart. Every encounter with the priest now carried a subtle, dangerous dance, where one wrong word could shatter everything they held dear. The weight of moral conflict pressed heavily on Carmelita, the pull of faith against the pull of desire tearing at her soul. And as she stared out at the moonlit garden, she realized that avoiding the priest's threats was no longer enough. They had to act, and soon. Do you want to keep this as is, or make any adjustments before we move to Chapter 4, Dangerous Decisions? Você disse, continue. O ChatGPT disse, perfect. Let's move on to Chapter 4, Dangerous Decisions. Here's Chapter 4, Block 1. Carmelita paced the quiet convent corridors, her mind a whirlwind of plans and what-ifs, each step echoing like a drumbeat of determination. She had always been gentle, obedient, devoted, but now desperation sharpened her instincts, and every thought was a careful calculation. Edward watched her from the shadows, torn between admiration and horror, knowing that her resolve carried both hope and danger. The night seemed alive around them, the garden's shadows stretching long and dark, mirroring the moral grayness of the choice before them. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown, a reminder that their love, precious and forbidden, might demand a sacrifice neither wanted to name. And yet, in her eyes, Edward saw a fire he had never seen before, a courage that could change everything, or destroy it all. Shall I continue with Block 2 of Chapter 4, or would you like any tweaks before we move on? Você diz, continue. O ChatGPT diz, here's Chapter 4, Block 2. Edward tried to speak, to urge caution, but Carmelita's resolve was unshakable, her mind already tracing the path of their next move. The convent walls seemed to hold their breath, listening to their unspoken plans, as if the shadows themselves knew the danger that lurked ahead. Every small gesture, Carmelita's tightening grip on a candle, Edward's restless pacing, was charged with tension, a silent dialogue of fear and determination. She wrestled with the morality of what she contemplated, feeling her faith clash violently with her love, each heartbeat echoing the impossible choice she faced. Edward's eyes never left hers, reflecting both trust and the dread of the unknown, silently asking if their love was worth the risk. And somewhere in the night, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a promise that their next step would be irreversible. Shall I continue with Block 3 of Chapter 4, or do you want any adjustments before we move on? Você diz, continue. O ChatGPT diz, here's Chapter 4, Block 3. Carmelita finally stopped pacing, her decision settling like a stone in her chest, heavy but resolute. She looked at Edward, seeing both fear and understanding mirrored in his eyes, a silent acknowledgement that they were about to cross a line from which there was no return. Every detail around them, the flicker of candlelight, the rustle of leaves outside, the distant chime of the convent bell, felt amplified, marking the gravity of the moment. Edward's hand found hers again, a quiet plea and a promise all at once, and Carmelita squeezed it, drawing strength from their shared courage. In that fragile silence, they both knew that the next move would decide the fate of their love, their lives, and the dangerous game they had unwillingly entered. And as the night deepened, a storm of anticipation and dread built between them, ready to sweep them into the unknown. Shall we move on to Chapter 5, Consequences and Choice? Or do you want any adjustments to Chapter 4 before we continue? Você disse, continue. O ChatGPT diz, perfect. Let's move on to Chapter 5. Consequences and Choice. Here's Chapter 5, Block 1. The convent felt heavier than ever, shadows clinging to the corners like silent witnesses as Father Matthias's presence grew more threatening by the hour. Carmelita moved with quiet determination, each step a careful balance between fear and resolve, knowing that the moment to act had arrived. Edward stayed close, a steady presence, his eyes filled with both worry and unwavering support, silently urging her to trust herself. The weight of their choices pressed down on them, the morality of their actions tangled with the raw intensity of their love. Every whispered plan, every glance shared, now carried the potential to tip their lives into chaos or salvation. And as Carmelita's hand brushed against Edward's, they both understood that nothing could prepare them for the storm about to hit. Shall I continue with Block 2 of Chapter 5, or do you want any tweaks to this first block? Você diz, continue. O ChatGPT diz, here's Chapter 5, Block 2. Father Matthias's shadow seemed to grow longer with each passing hour, his subtle threats turning into open demands that tested every ounce of Carmelita's resolve. She felt her heart tighten with each word, each insinuation, knowing that inaction could destroy everything she and Edward had fought to protect. Edward gripped her hand, their fingers entwined, a small anchor in a sea of uncertainty and fear. Carmelita's mind raced, balancing love, morality, and survival, weighing the consequences of every possible choice. The convent, once a place of sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield, every corridor a reminder of the danger they faced. And in the quiet moments between threats, the tension lingered, electric and suffocating, pushing them ever closer to a decision that could change their lives forever. Shall I continue with Block 3 of Chapter 5, the final block, to conclude the story? Você diz, continue. O ChatGPT diz, here's Chapter 5, Block 3. Carmelita took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest, and stepped forward with a courage she hadn't known she possessed. Edward's eyes never left hers, a mixture of hope and fear shining in their depths, silently promising he would stand by her no matter what. Every sound in the convent, the creak of floorboards, the distant toll of the bell, even the whisper of the wind, seemed to amplify the gravity of the moment. Father Matthias's presence loomed, but Carmelita felt a strange calm settle over her, a clarity born of desperation and love intertwined. Their hearts raced, yet in that shared beat, they found a strange sense of freedom, knowing the choice was theirs and theirs alone. And as they moved together into the unknown, the consequences of their actions began to unfold, shaping a future neither could fully predict, but both were ready to face.